when I first saw this headline, not gonna lie to you guys, I thought it was like from The Onion. I thought it was a satirical headline. Now, we know that Alex Jones has to pay almost $1 billion already to the families of the Sandy Hook victims. But now, look at this. This is in Bloomberg. Sandy Hook families seek $2.75 trillion from Alex Jones. $2.75 trillion? What? What are we talking about here? Again, note the source, Bloomberg. This is in Bloomberg. So this is like an actual story. Okay. So let me tell you what they say here. Sandy Hook families asked a Connecticut judge to order Alex Jones to pay $2.75 trillion in damages in addition to the almost $1 billion a jury awarded for defamation, claiming only the highest possible punitive damages will stop the InfoWars host from continuing to harm them. Now, let me pause right there. I sincerely don't believe there's any amount of money that Alex Jones would have to pay where he would stop being ridiculous and stop saying absurd things. I think that's just, it's in his DNA. It's who he is. He's never going to stop. So the idea that this is something that'll prevent it in the future, I don't know what they base that on. I mean, you would think that after the decision where you have to pay like almost $1 billion, you would reel it in a little bit. But if anything, he cranked it up. He was on air reacting to the verdict in his own fucking trial. And he was sort of making fun of it. The family said they're entitled to the amount because Jones broke a state law barring the sale of products using false statements. They reached the sum by multiplying the state's law, $5,000 per violation fine, by the 550 million social media exposures Jones' audience received on his Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter accounts in the 3 years following a school shooting that claimed the lives of 20 first graders and 6 educators in 2012. Okay, so the point that they're trying to make here is, well, they didn't really pull this number out of their ass. This is actually, it's empirical and it's based on, we did this calculation and this was the result. This is the point that they're trying to make here. Here's why I don't buy that at all. And the reason I don't buy that is very simple. It's not that all 550 million social media exposures were all on the issue of Sandy Hook. In fact, it's not even close to that. It's not even half of the social media exposures that are about Sandy Hook. Alex Jones covered all sorts of issues on a regular basis. Now, yes, he was like the only main player going with the line that Sandy Hook was a hoax. But the idea that it's all 550 million social media exposures, that's just utterly made up. That's just not true. That's not even close to true. Jones called family members crisis actors for years and said their loved ones weren't murdered during an elementary school massacre. He denied his statements were defamatory. Quote, Alex Jones perpetrates this attack for one reason, greed. The family's lawyer said in the filing Friday, Alex Jones will never treat them like real people because they are too valuable to him as targets. State Judge Barbara Bellis will determine the final amount Jones must pay. She has previously said Jones violated the Connecticut Unfair Trade Practices Act, or CUTPA, by selling supplements and survival gear during shows that featured his false claims about Sandy Hook. Okay, so it is interesting because they're rolling together two separate issues here. I've told you guys before, if there was ever an issue that I thought Alex Jones would go down over, I thought it was his bogus supplements. Because he's got a lot of them. He sells a lot of totally bogus supplements. There's been studies done. People have bought his supplements and then studied them and said, hey, what is this stuff? Does it work? Etc. Effectively, it's similar stuff that you would get at like GNC or Vitamin Shop, but it also still doesn't fucking work, right? So, which says a little something about GNC and Vitamin Shop too, because the supplement market is totally unregulated. It's a total crapshoot. It's not the same as, I got a lot of issues with Big Pharma, but when you get pharmaceutical grade drugs, it is regulated by the FDA, and you're actually getting what it says you're getting, right? With supplements, that's not the case. But they're rolling together that issue with Sandy Hook because they're saying he would hook people in with Sandy Hook coverage, and then he would hawk them the supplements, which is true. But I would say the any sort of supplement lawsuit, it's a different issue. It's an argument of basically fraud. You're selling something that doesn't do the shit that you pretend it does. And the Sandy Hook stuff is a separate thing about defamation. I get the argument, but it's a little bit of a stretch to me. Like, oh, he hooked him in with Sandy Hook, and then he, sold them the supplements. He also hooked him in by calling Obama a demon and calling Hillary a demon and, going after the Bush administration as well, back in the Bush administration days. It's one of the few times Alex Jones was right about shit was when he would call Bush an authoritarian for doing NSA spying and doing the Patriot Act, etc. The InfoWars host claims he's bankrupt. If he wasn't before, he certainly is now, and has vowed not to pay the families a dime. On November 12th, a Connecticut jury awarded 8 families and an FBI agent who responded to the shooting $965 million for the harassment they suffered from InfoWars fans who bought into Jones' hoax theory. The jurors weren't asked to consider cutba and were only asked to calculate defamation and emotional distress damages after Bellis ruled in a separate proceeding that Jones had defamed the families. Jones was found liable by default because he repeatedly refused to provide testimony and documents detailing how much his enterprise earns. Traditionally, cutba has been used to compensate individuals directly harmed by deceptively marketed products. However, the Connecticut Supreme Court decided in a case Sandy Hook's parents brought against the maker of the rifle used in the shooting that cutba damages could be awarded to victims indirectly harmed by products marketed with false statements. Well, that's the other thing is these products weren't marketed with false statements as it pertains to Sandy Hook. They were marketed with their own false statements about the nature of the supplements and about how, Alex Jones is the last truth teller on the planet or whatever. So, again, a little bit of a stretch legally speaking. Pattis also claimed the victims' lawyers should have had to show jurors the amount of damages each plaintiff was entitled to, rather than merely argue damages should be big enough to stop Jones. The family's lawyers also failed to tie the specific harassment each victim suffered to Jones, Pattis said. So the judge has a more nuanced view, clearly. Anyway, this goes on. You guys get the gist of it, but, that number now is, that's barely a real number. You have the GDP of many major nations. It doesn't even hit that number. What are we really talking about here? So I have no doubt at the very least, Alex Jones made tens of millions of dollars. I wouldn't be surprised if he's made and is worth over $100 million. And he's doing all this financial trickery to try to hide it and be sly about it, so he limits the damages, and he's trying to get off the hook here without really paying much of anything. I don't know how that's going to work because I'm not a legal expert. I don't know what he can do and get away with and what he can do and can't get away with. But look, maybe I'm a softie here, but I think the $965 million took care of what the issue was. Actually, I take that back. Like I said, you're never going to fix Alex Jones. Alex Jones just is what he is and who he is, and, he's deleterious to the national conversation, right? There's no doubt about that. But there's nothing more to gain from making the $965 million verdict $2.75 trillion. He's already never going to be able to pay back the $965 million, and of course, he would never be able to pay back the $2.75 trillion. It's just now you're stretching it to sort of a comical degree where I literally thought this was a satirical headline, And then, look, I do think the arguments are a little facile and glib when people say, they compare Alex Jones's case saying fucked up things to well, what about the real world harm done by X? And they didn't have to pay anything. They didn't have to do anything. And it's true. You could find, pharmaceutical companies that hawked something dangerous and eventually pulled it off the market. And while the product was out there, it killed people and they were deceptive about it. And, they don't have to pay anything, or they don't have to pay nearly enough. I get that argument. I did think it was a little glib previously though. But now when you look at this, it's I don't know, man. It kind of strikes me the wrong way that you got Dick Cheney and George W. Bush that are absolute war criminals and torturers who have blood on their hands and, basically facilitated the deaths of at least hundreds of thousands, maybe over 1 million. And they're, waltzing around out there, no problem whatsoever, doing whatever the fuck they want to do. And Alex Jones just said fucked up shit and he's $2.75 trillion? $2.75 trillion. So anyway, this is not a defense of Alex Jones. It's just to say that we can all acknowledge that when we see a headline that looks like it's fucking satirical, because it is, that number is colossally made up, right? So, I don't know if it's a legal strategy too. You overreach so that when there is a ruling, you still get a shitload of money. That might be the idea here, I guess. It's that old saying, if you shoot for the stars, you may reach the moon. I probably butchered that phrase, but you get the gist of it. Maybe that's what's going on here from a legal perspective. But yeah, this is one of those headlines and one of those stories where, you can almost get people to feel a little sorry for this fucker. Now, he's not the victim. It's the families of the Sandy Hook massacre who are the victims. And there were even instances, by the way, I had thought Alex Jones never doxed these people, but that wasn't true. There actually was one Sandy Hook family that was doxed by a co-host on Alex Jones' show with him sitting right next to him. Okay? So they are the victims. Make no mistake about it. One guy killed himself. Another family had to move 6 different times. People harassed them, etc. We heard the voicemails that are fucking deranged of Alex's fans just being super anti-Semitic and saying, the worst things imaginable. So they're the victims, but 2.75 trillion. What are we talking about here? What are we talking about? What are we talking about, dog? What are we talking about? 2.75 trillion? Trillion. Trillion dollar. Trillion. Okay. All right. That 965 million is that'll do the trick, if you ask me. Ever since Adpocalypse, when YouTube defunded all independent news and politics overnight, we haven't trusted them. We know they can pull the rug out from underneath us at any time. If you enjoy this content, please consider tipping $1 or $2 per month on the Secular Talk Patreon. Link in the video description box below. Thanks for your support.